All right. So, welcome everyone to the MTT News of the Week. We're back. We had some technical issues, but it's great to be back. Great to have you back as well, Jen.
Great to be back. It's been frustrating with the streaming platforms. Technical difficulties that are outside of our control, quite literally. So now that we've switched, everything's good. So we're back to normal.
Yeah, exactly. That's it. It's good. It's good to be back. Yes. So we will be covering all of the things we missed. Well, we'll try and cover all of the things we missed. We missed quite a lot of things. So in the time that we were gone, so last week we had our technical issue with BeLive. They failed. We've now switched to a different hosting platform. So yes, we missed a conversation about the no confidence vote for Imran Khan in Pakistan. So to update you, there was a no confidence vote. He lost. There will now be a re-election of the president of Pakistan, and that takes place in October, I believe. Yes, so that's going on. He lost, and now he's running again. To sort of put some, we'll come back to that. We'll make some comments about that in a moment. The French election, we missed that too. So obviously Macron and Le Pen won the first round. So they both have gone on to the runoffs, which are this weekend. Sunday, the 24th, is the French election. We'll see how that goes. Marine Le Pen, obviously far right, if you want to use that term. And I guess Macron would be described as the president of the rich, is what his critics would call him. The rich man's president. Anyway. Then, of course, the things we did miss were the fallout from the Bucha incident, as well as fallout from the Kramatorsk railway station incident. And I think we'll talk about both of those when it comes to the Ukraine section. We'll talk about Ukraine at the end of this stream.
Yeah.
Other stuff then were protests in Sri Lanka. Huge protests. The cabinet resigned, and a general sort of political upheaval there, which I still think is
just due to general bankruptcy of the government, the state itself, and politicians, you including president, including their entire Congress, or at least a good majority of it, has resigned, but even that does nothing.
Right. And yeah, I think corruption, lots of economic issues were at the heart of that. And they defaulted. So they've defaulted on all of their debt. Maybe not all of the debt, but they've defaulted on major debt, and are busy having discussions with the IMF, China, and others. Cool. Big news, which we will be talking about later, is, of course, the lockdown in Shanghai and how that's going, and some of the problems and lessons that are being learned in Shanghai right now with the lockdown. We'll talk about that in the middle of the show. We did, yes. So we also got the announcement from Carrie Lam, the leader of Hong Kong in the government right now. She will not be running again. So it's the beginning of the end of her leadership in Hong Kong. And a new guy, the front runner is, he's from the sort of, I guess, the security apparatus. Sort of, he's worked for the police as well as the military and fire sort of security services in Hong Kong, and he's being pointed to as most likely guy to take over from Carrie Lam. We'll see how that goes. Nancy Pelosi was supposed to go on a trip to Asia, and of course that included Thailand. Right. Well, she was going to go to Japan and all over the place, and of course that included a trip to Taiwan, which China was very unhappy about. And maybe, fortunately for her, she got COVID and they cancelled her trip. So some people still went. I think Lindsey Graham was still in Taiwan.
Immediately afterwards, she tested COVID negative after she, like 4 days or so. So that was either a happy accident or intentional.
Strategic accident.
Yes, strategic accident.
Nonetheless, I mean, I know that Lindsey Graham went, but it wasn't a very loud visit. It was pretty tame and pretty reserved. I think those are the best words to use. Nonetheless, one we'll start with this today is Elon Musk becoming the largest shareholder of Twitter. So this was quite a back and forth kind of story. It was announced that he was the biggest shareholder and he didn't want to do a hostile takeover. He didn't want to have, too much of a say. So he just wanted a seat on the board. And then Twitter announced that actually they didn't want to give him that. So there was a back and forth. And I think that's still going on with Musk taking over and trying to have a say on how Twitter is run. If you want to comment on that one, Jim, let's start with that. Elon Musk taking over Twitter.
Sure. I mean, on this front, the very first thing we saw was Fox News going all crazy about they're champions of corporate monopolists are finally standing up for their liberty against the liberal crackdown on American freedom and what have you. But then, as you said, it was not exactly that, or if it is, it's not like a direct conflict. But it is kind of the very fact that Elon Musk even did that caused a lot of panic in your liberal circles who firmly believe in liberal kind of the dictatorship of the bourgeoisie and censorship, right? The people that actually sincerely believes that. But here's the problem, right? The corporate monopolists, their interest is not, if you're really for free speech, somebody like Elon Musk, his interest is not fully against the liberal order. Granted, he had some popularity and success during the Trump era, and the Trump crowd quite enjoyed him. But that's not to say that he is this anti-establishment hero. He made his wealth from establishment. He is just a part of this kind of I would say he is a fallout of the secondary contradiction of the United States, which is military-industrial complex. So he is the secondary of the secondary. And so for him to contradict the primary, which would be finance capital, yeah, good luck. Not happening. That's all I have to say on this.
Do you think he would say he represents what, tech capital, or sort of what does Elon Musk represent? Sorry.
Tech capital that is kind of the civilian side of the military-industrial complex, because all the technology and the industry that they use is either from NASA or fallouts of, say, DARPA programs like Bluetooth, GPS, Starlink, so on. And they are part of the same interest group, essentially.
Yeah. I mean, I think even the BBC described this as kind of like an old tycoon, like a baron from the 19th century, coming in and just buying the newspaper and then just getting the newspaper to publish what he wants. That was what the BBC of all places described this kind of motion as. The big rich guy buying the platform to publish things. I mean, I know there's more complexity because he's saying it's for free speech and all of these things, but I don't know. At least there was one description of it. And I think this is, it certainly, it does, it feeds into that conversation about the idea of free speech and the idea of how money plays into politics. Because if you can buy Twitter, if you can buy Washington Post, you can buy XYZ newspapers, major newspapers on media platforms and news channels, and you can sit on the board. Sure, the journalists and writers and people that create the content and the outputs of those media platforms, sure, they're individuals and they can write, but you're on the board and the board goes, oh well, who should we hire? Who should be our chief editor? Who should be this? And of course the board has a say. The idea that the board has no oversight and plays no role in contributing to who gets picked for the big jobs and ultimately which writers are the big writers.
It's much like don't control the boss, control the editors, and you control the newspaper, right? It's it's what our guest Tavasio said. He summed it up perfectly. I highly recommend that episode of all the episodes that we did of exactly this kind of quote unquote structureless control happens.
Okay, so that's Elon Musk. Then Elon Musk takes over. Well, he's trying to take over Twitter, trying to dominate our speech. So one of our comments there, from Yom Tom about Gonzalo. So we'll bring this up actually when we're going to talk about Russia and Ukraine at the end of this, towards the last third, let's say. because there's a couple stories there. We're going to talk about the Moskva, the ship that sank. We're going to talk about Gonzalo Lira, the disappearance of this journalist / director in Kharkov, and then of course the Russian advance in general, but also the 2 British guys that were captured. There's a Ukrainian politician that the Russians are demanding in exchange for the British fighters, which we'll talk about that in a bit. But yes, we will be talking about Gonzalo Lira at the end of the show, at the last third, let's say. So let's talk about. Let's just cover some sort of the other stories. Sadly, we have to sort of put priority on things. There's been lots of stories about. From Africa, of course, South Africa, we had a huge flood in Durban. So at the moment, at least 440 people died, which is huge. Nearly 4,000 homes were destroyed because of flooding. So there was a 1 month worth of rain in one day. And I've seen lots of videos and stuff from friends and sent me stuff from down there. And it's like the end of the world. There's just water going down everywhere. And now the government, the ANC's in hot water actually, because of the fact that the reason the death toll is so high. People live in shacks. People live in temporary housing that they've built themselves. Some of them have been there for decades. None of this has drainage, and none of this was ever supposed to. People were never supposed to live in these things. There's no, these are not residential zones. I know that lots of ordinary houses that are in zones were also flooded, but I think the reason why that number is so high is largely part because of a byproduct of poverty and a lack of housing.
And also, we should pay attention to, with any natural disasters, the rescue efforts, because again, a human being dies without water in 3 days, without food about a week. Okay, without oxygen, that's another business. But essentially, what you always have in these crises is the ability to get access to clean water. So if you do not immediately provide that, then people will be left with no choice to either just die of thirst, or worse, arguably worse, drink polluted and unclean water with parasites and insect eggs and all sorts of diseases in them, just to stay alive in the short term. But then will cause very long-term problems. So, and the transportation of the water that is needed to sustain and the calories of food, and the ability to be able to search and rescue and deliver those food and water and medical aids. It's a very intense project, and this is why, global South countries whose governments aren't well established will always have a difficult time. We've seen that, and also corrupt first world governments, quote unquote first world, seeing that in Kentucky, seeing that in the volcano explosion a few months ago, and now we're seeing it again. So best of luck to those people.
I hope that they can be helped, and that I think also some lessons can be learned in terms of avoiding this, because if a flood like this happens once, it can happen again. So maybe they should definitely learn from this. Sort of other minor stories. Obviously globally minor, obviously very important for the region. In Colombia, so we're seeing armed groups. This is from the New York Times, battling over drug trade. Okay, so illegal armed groups recruiting people in the jungle in the Amazon. This is quite an interesting one, because I think FARC obviously disbanded their armed struggle in 2016. They signed a peace accord with government, but I have a feeling, this is a projection on my part, that that arrangement is not going to hold. We had a conversation on our podcast with Yanis Iqbal, an Indian journalist. He was talking about the pink tide, the return of sort of quote unquote South American 21st century socialism, and Colombia. Already last year there was lots of protests, lots of conflict.
Because
that dark element is returning. I think they're going back to that.
Because under that treaty that you mentioned, Richard, the U.S. essentially This is pretty much the only time that the United States has succeeded in quote unquote pacifying, making a region more secure. And it is done by investment infrastructure, schools, hospitals, so on and so forth, not through direct force. But obviously, with the U.S. In general decline, in 2020 there was a meeting of democracy conference with the United States and Francis Fukuyama, the infamous end of history guy, with the leaders of all the South American states, whom were literally so disinterested in what Francis Fukuyama had to say about liberalism being, supreme and all that shenanigans, to the point where they were literally playing on their phones. It's like, are you going to give me money? No, you're not going to give me money to solve my situation of a COVID economic crisis. All right, I'm going to keep playing fruit. That's one of the most hilarious news, sad but hilarious news. So now we're seeing the effects of this. The region can only be stable if it has a stable economic foundation determines superstructure. As COVID happens, as American money is no longer coming in, as American power drains, as worldwide kind of enters a year of food crisis, so on and so forth, power struggle and vacuum and desperation is going to be inevitable, and socialism will effectively be the only thing that can bring order to chaos. So yeah, like exactly as you say, that will probably be inevitable. Unless, of course, imperialism somehow finds the money and the guns to do colonization again.
Right. Okay. So then, in terms of, I mean, we are probably brushing over many other minor stories, sadly, because there's a lot of things that happen. So just for fun, while we're here, just 2 fun stories before we start with the serious stuff. New Jersey started selling recreational cannabis yesterday, the 21st of April. So not 420, 421.
How pathetic. They can't even get that right. Absolutely disgusting.
Right. Okay. I mean, maybe a weed company or the organizers of the legalization forgot that 420.
Because they were on 420.
Right. Yeah, exactly. No, they put it off. It's 420. We'll legalize tomorrow. Yeah. Right. Anyway, but you've got a funny, funny. I mean, yes, I guess you could say it's funny, but also very concerning story. Go ahead.
4 men in India were arrested after being found out that they have raped lizards in an animal sanctuary. Giant lizards. Just one clue. The reproductive organ of lizards are not compatible with that of mammals, which is us. So it's curious how they managed to pull that off.
I mean, perhaps. I mean, we know David Icke has told us that the lizard people run the world. Maybe there's something at play here. Maybe this is how they breed.
Possibly.
I don't know. Maybe we found them. I don't know. But yeah, there's just something a bit lighthearted there. Let's we'll leave that one there. Let's go to Shanghai then. Let's talk about Shanghai, because this is pretty big stuff. So just to recap, if you're not familiar with what's going on in Shanghai, they've had a lockdown, COVID lockdown, mainly Omicron cases, on and off for about 6 weeks. There was a solid lockdown, comprehensive lockdown for 4 weeks. They've opened and then closed, and it's gone back and forth, and it's really
in their politics. Ladies and gentlemen, guess who's from Shanghai? Me. No, the situation is very chaotic. So right from the beginning, as we saw the cases in Hong Kong, with how more contagious Omicron is compared to previous variants. And even though the short-term death rate is not high, because people were getting infected so quickly, there were still a lot of people dying very quickly, right? All other cities in China took it as a warning of be really cautious with this. But Shanghai was we had a peculiar situation where first you had clinical experts, not epidemiologists, coming out to say that they should practice the Western approach of a coexistence and herd immunity with the virus. These influential medical figures has just been, and it's been blown out of proportion and propagated online like wildfire. So, of course, Shanghai, you have to understand, much like Hong Kong, was a colony. Shanghai was one of the cities where the eight nations in the late 18 to early 1900s, U.S., Britain, Russia, Japan, Germany, and France, I think, so on and so forth, had colonies in Shanghai. It wasn't as thorough as Hong Kong, but still. So the cultural ethos of Shanghai is very Western worshiping. So when they saw that Western, and it's also a center of, go figure, finance capital. It's the center of finance of China. Though it is finance capital is state owned, the conception of the people that's working in the finance industry are very much Friedman neoliberal libertarians. That is a huge thing that goes on in Shanghai. And you also have to consider that the government of Shanghai was the kind of personnel from administrative talents that get sent to Shanghai are the kinds of people that are best at these kind of finance problems, not necessarily crisis alleviation, governance, or disaster rescue, that kind of stuff. And the control mechanisms of the CPC, literally the party, at the neighborhood level is very underdeveloped there due to this kind of atomization into this kind of general resentment. So southern China also has we have a saying, 天高皇帝远. The heaven is high, just like the emperor is far away. As to show like the southern China used to historically be like the Wild West of like Assassin's Creed. So all of these cultural and conceptual things compounded together, along with this kind of deliberate misinformation on the parts of various malicious actors, let's not name names here because that's not confirmed, has led to this massive chaos of somehow social medias are able to debunk legitimate information coming out of the Shanghai government itself.
Sure.
This information has gotten so thorough that of course, in this kind of situation, people are confused, and also people's conception aren't necessarily in the best place. You also have government, the Chinese government sending help from all across the country with people who aren't necessarily familiar with the local situation and are just kind of trying to follow the orders by the book and are very detached from the kind of evolution of confused ethos that's been happening locally. So that leads to a lot of miscoordination. So let me give you an example. Like nasal and swabs, right? The mRNA testing. Depending on where the situation is more urgent, these testing crews needs to be sent to different parts of the city. So but like these things happen in real time, right? So you would have like a massive group of testing personnel show up in a neighborhood. But then, they will. Everybody thought, oh, we're gonna get tested, but no, they're gone. They're being relocated to another place all of a sudden, and then people are just like, what's going on? What's happening? Nobody told us anything. What is this all about? Well, why is there so much? But it's really a kind of a conception issue and a communication issue. And also an administration issue, because when people are in lockdown, the Shanghai kind of neighborhood level government personnel are not. They don't have the right support. They don't have the right training. They don't have the right coordination to be able to feed people. So like they have massive stockpiles of food, but they can't deliver it to the people at the right place at the right time.
Yeah, just to clarify, so you can see. Just one quick. You can see
they're appreciated for the longest time. That's been an issue for decades now, arguably ever since the 2000s, maybe even earlier.
Jen, so you just want to clarify. You can see that the video is not interrupting. You've got, obviously, it'll fine. Okay, fine. I suppose just on a sort of first account level, I think you've given a good description of the system and sort of what Shanghai is as a city, the international influence. I mean, I'll also say that it is also the home of the Communist Party too. So it's not entirely a lost cause. The CPC was founded
the home
there too.
of the underground history of the Communist Party, where they were getting hunted down 24/7. That's the history of.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So I mean, since we have someone, I mean, I assume you're in contact with people there.
Yeah.
Have you got any sort of maybe a detail of the kind of time frames and the issues that perhaps your friends or family that are there right now have gone through? So in terms of how many weeks they've had to stay at home.
I mean, take this with a grain of salt. My father's retired, so he doesn't have much going on. So that's not necessarily the most neutral perspective. But like for someone like that, you get your food and then you stay at home, and then you get like 1 to 2 COVID tests administered to you per day, and essentially it's a quarantine, and everybody just sit at home and do their own thing. So the real problem then is not for people like my father, who already owns his own place of living and is like living on retirement checks. The real problem is for people who are working manufacturer jobs and are renting. That's the real concern. And again, Shanghai is like the kind of literally the worst possible manifestation of that, because it is so finance centric. For the longest time, if you were to even talk about like Marxism in a place like Shanghai, it would be kind of strange. And a lot of Shanghai universities are kind of teaching you basically Friedman economics. That's the kind of stuff that goes on. And these are, unfortunately, some of the best universities in China. And things just go downhill from there, essentially.
Right. I mean, so right now, there's actually a number of Chinese cities that are in lockdown. So it's not just Shanghai. You've got Tangshan, I believe Changsha, which is the car manufacturing city. And I think it's at like 9 different cities, loads of different cities, not just Shanghai. The big question mark is because, of course, this policy, like the zero COVID, it's under heavy strain because to 25 million people under lockdown or various forms of lockdown for more than 6 weeks, it's a huge strain for people, and also the testing capability. So like just the sheer volume of testing that needs to take place. I know they're having issues with just being able to meet the sheer volume of like gloves and swab stuff because it was, I mean, China builds everything, makes everything, but even China to be able to keep that level of testing for Shanghai is just Shanghai, never mind the other cities, is a big strain. So I don't know what your thoughts on this in terms of where this is going to go for, does this mean that they're going to continue holding this policy in place until
this
cases...
is pretty much the CPC has decided that this is going to be permanent. So for a few reasons, because the long-term damage of COVID. I mean, here in the United States, so we're already calling it a COVID brain. So those friends of us who are Uber drivers who drive full-time are already noticing. Previously, people used to drive aggressively, but they're very responsive. Now people are driving slower, but it's like they're numb. But people on average are even using their turn signals a lot less than previously. And in Western corporations, manufacturing places especially, it's usually things are like 70% staffed. The company can only realistically have enough workers for 4 days a week. And this is tremendously damaging. So from China's perspective, no matter the cost of containment, it is cheaper than if the long-term implications of COVID were to hit full force. Because, again, China is a manufacturing hub, right? Can you imagine if you just cut all of China's manufacturing by like 1/3? See what happens to GDP. That's called... And, China's manufacturing is what is keeping the world's economy going. The only reason countries like the United States is able to survive its inflation is because of Chinese goods. Imagine if that were to just all of a sudden, like, nope, we don't have any more.
Inflation would be
the whole world dies, quite literally. And also this kind of coexistence thing really is being pushed by people in China that has connections, suspiciously tight connections to American pharmaceuticals such as Pfizer and Moderna and so on and so forth. If you notice, in a lot of these disinformations coming out of it is launched by Chinese finance capital who were dissatisfied with how Alibaba and the Ant group, these finance high-interest loan groups are disbanded. And essentially they want to wreak chaos on the Chinese system. And all of these statements made by a lot of these, again, clinical experts, not epidemiologists, they all recommend, the solution package is open up, no lockdowns, coexistence, and buy as much Pfizer meds as one possibly can buy.
Yeah.
That is really suspicious.
I'm curious to see where this goes. So I think we know that... Oh, man, I'm not used to seeing injections. I know that... Sorry, that distracted me. I think that it's a big test for the policy. I think that this is not an easy time for the policy, the zero COVID policy. There's a lot of frustration. I've heard it from colleagues and from, if you go on, online, you can see a lot of Chinese people pretty upset.
Oh, and one huge thing that I forgot, there's also a lot of regional discrimination. So Shanghai, as a colony city, has always saw itself being more civilized and educated than the rest of the country. Right. And now that this kind of bourgeois conception is hurting Shanghai and hurting the country as a whole, rest of the country is also fairly holds a lot of resentment against this kind of colonialist conception that Shanghai, many people Shanghai has always held. And it's a massive kind of what we here at the MTT call mutually reciprocating echo chamber, where the delusions and a resentment of one side, instead of coming to resolution, makes the other side more angry and dive deeper into their own misconception, and then vice versa. And then you have a system of mutual kind of misunderstanding that will not slow down. It's something very typical in the Western world. In China, people tend to do a better job at noticing that kind of useless shenanigans. But now with this whole thing, MREC in the form of conception has truly formed. and we will see the outcomes of that in the future.
Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah.
And it's not.
I think what seems to be certain. I mean, no one can say this is certain. Is that the policy will be in place until after Party Congress in September. You know, obviously the party and particularly Xi can't have chaos before Congress. So that would be bad for his reputation. We'll see what happens. I'm skeptical as to. I agree with you on the whole thing of, you know, the health of the economy, the health of people. It's the priority. But in terms of integrating with the global economy, in terms of integrating with a world that's given up on COVID, does this mean we have to have two worlds where there's a China that is permanently separated in some form because its people haven't
already cull?
Well, there is not right now. What I mean, will it continue? Is this indefinite? Will we have the cold world and the unculled CULL?
From China's perspective, certainly. Because for the sake of COVID brain alone, if China can maintain zero COVID to have 99% of the population to be not affected by long-term fallouts of COVID on the human intelligence psyche, whereas the rest of the world does, well, that just means that is a huge competitive advantage for China. That in terms of creativity, in terms of scientific or artistic cultural, philosophical innovations, that is a huge advantage that you couldn't pay enough money to get. And that is from a selfish perspective. From a larger perspective, that's called preserving the progress of civilization.
Right. I hope that the rest of the world can maybe not suffer such a disadvantage, and perhaps China can help with that. But we'll see. So let's, this policy will continue for the rest of the year. I don't think this is going anywhere anytime soon. Let's just hope that people don't get too upset and too angry, and let's hope that they can manage stuff in Shanghai and help, and not have these kind of stories coming out where individual cases of mismanagement by the working staff on the ground who are overworked. I mean, it's a difficult situation. There's a lot of staff,
very much.
A lot of people to manage, and it's very difficult. So I don't blame them for that in that sense. Anyway, let's move on to obviously the one that everyone is talking about, Russia and Ukraine, of course, still the big story, the big news.
We forgot.
Quick one.
Since we're going to talk about the military situation, we might as well.
Oh, sorry. Yes. Go ahead. Chinese military update.
Chinese military has now made its DF-27 hypersonic anti-ship ballistic missiles available to be both air-launched and ship-launched. Possibly also submarine-launched, but that's not confirmed yet. But it is now able to be launched off of Type 055, quote-unquote destroyer, but the Americans call it cruiser because rightly so, it's the biggest modern warship in the world. And is the tonnage and size of World War II cruisers, and can also be launched from the H-6 series of bombers in the air. So what that means is that the age of aircraft carriers and of American maritime dominance is just completely over. Because previously these missiles are so damn big that you can only launch it on land with these massive trucks. But guess what? Now, any Chinese naval or aerial assets who are both the H-6 series and the Type 055 can travel like across the Pacific Ocean. They're very long distance platforms which can launch this missile. So the DF series of hypersonics, the traits with them is that they are so fast that you cannot intercept them.
Right. Okay. This is a hypersonic missile.
Moving targets. Even if you can. Yeah, go ahead.
Just to clarify, so the new missile is not the one that can be launched by the bomber and by the cruiser is a standard anti-ship missile, and there's a separate hypersonic missile.
No. It is the anti-ship hypersonic missile.
So it's same missile, hypersonic missile.
Yes, same missile. Yes, it's a technology that I'm pretty sure only China has. Maybe Russia. I'm not too familiar with their systems because obviously look at me. What it is even if your radar can pick it up, when the missile is traveling at such speeds, you only have 3 minutes since you made contact with your radar waves and you getting struck. No, because it can change course at will. A very basic idea is if a missile were to travel this direction, right? Travel one way, you want to anticipate and meet it at that point. That's called interception. But if it makes a turn this way, so your algorithm tells you that you're going this way, right? You want to meet it here, but it just makes an S-turn.
Okay.
So it's basically mathematics and laws of physics tells us that conventional interception does not work against this kind of tech. I think and now essentially China can deliver such envelope all the way to the coast of California, and that is not a joke. So or anywhere in the world. And the only thing that's preventing that is American nuclear submarines, which are still very powerful. So really, the balance has fundamentally changed between China and U.S.
Sure. I do think there was some news about scramjet technology coming out of the U.S., some new hypersonic missile. But let's not cover that this week. Let's talk about that a bit further. And just to add one point in terms of the fact that hypersonic weapons, particularly the Chinese one you're talking about, but also even the one that the Russians used in Ukraine, it's openly stated. U.S. generals are on mainstream media saying there isn't a counter to this right now. They don't have a counter to it. So it's not a theory. It's not a hypothetical. This is an open fact that right now there isn't a prominent, effective known counter to hypersonic missiles. Aircraft carriers would be included in that as a target. Let's go into Russia and Ukraine then. So we, having had technical difficulties and other difficulties the last 2 weeks, we have a lot to cover. So let's try and we'll have to both pick the stories we want to talk about.
Sure.
So let's just cover what's happening right now, just a quick immediate situation. So right now, of course, the big offensive on the eastern side, the big campaign in the Donbass. So Russian troops have pulled back from Kiev in the north. From what is, in my opinion, I think is an accurate description, the hold operation, holding lots of Ukrainian battalions and regiments in Odessa and in Kiev and in Chernihiv and all those northern cities. That has served its purpose because Mariupol has been taken.
Surrounded.
I say Mariupol is taken because there are only troops now left in the ground, in holes.
Bunker itself that we talked about last week. That's actually confirmed now.
Right. So yes, that's true. So right now the big fight is over Donbass. So now we're talking about big open field tank battles, sort of Kursk or Kharkov, sort of World War II style open country conflict. Just on Mario,
one of tanks players will get a kick out of this because open field tank battles in Eastern Europe. Oh my gosh, that's the name of all the maps that you play on. Okay, I'm sorry.
Right. This is out of the history books. Yeah, we're talking about World War II style open conflict tank battles. In Mariupol, obviously, we had been reporting, and everyone had been reporting. The fall of Mariupol. Mariupol is taken. It is taken. The guys are just in, as Jen said, Azovstal Steelworks, which does have a 6-story or something like that, huge tunnel, bunkers, storerooms,
that's
all
built,
sorts.
In the Soviet era, in case they get a nuclear attack, because that steel works is the biggest, one of the biggest ones in all of former USSR, right? So the idea is that you want to keep steel production going after
during war,
not a direct hit per se. So they've really weaponized Azov battalion has been weaponizing that bunker ever since I'd say 2014 or 16, and armed it to the teeth, right? So the situation is that Russia after fully surrounding it and fully occupying every single above ground hole, really, that there is to be, first struck it with a bunker buster bomb, but decided later on, Putin decided that it's not worth the kind of psychological torture on both sides, really, to continue this fight. Because underground fighting, extremely nasty. The U.S. military has done a very extensive study and training and theoretical research into underground fighting. So underground fighting is extremely brutal. It is more brutal than even Stalingrad, because it is Stalingrad, but plus the fact that you cannot breathe. The tunnel can get easily collapsed, like in World War I. And there is you can get burned alive, or you can get ambushed in many ways that wouldn't be possible if you're above ground because you're in a tunnel. So every single soldier going in needs, say, breathing apparatus. Like, such ideas are just so insane. And to fight against those, well, there's also the extremely inhumane option: flood it with water, pump toxic gas, burn all the holes to get rid of all the oxygen. So, like, extremely cruel and inhumane options from both sides. So Putin decided against that. So
so you jumped ahead of me.
I respect that. I really do, because
that's yesterday's story. You're absolutely right. So because of the nature of the fighting, like you said, and how intense it will be, and also you're going to have casualties. Russian casualties are inevitable if you go into that kind of situation. So Putin actually called off the attack. Now, obviously, New York Times and the West are saying, "Aha! You see, Putin is pulling back, accepting defeat. He can't beat them in Azovstal." I mean, the other thing about this is also that there's lots of civilians apparently in these bunkers too. Yeah. So I understand that they wanted to obviously get away from the shelling and the fighting and whatnot. But really,
this reminds me of the Berlin flak towers that Hitler built in the last days, where the assault on those were extremely difficult in taking Berlin. It was armed to the teeth. You can't even blow it up. After the war, they wanted to demolish it with controlled demolition. They can't even do that because it was so heavily built. But there was way too many civilians, pregnant women, infants, or sick elderly. It was like running out of medicine. It was running out of food, running out of toilet paper and such. To the point where it was just a nasty humanitarian crisis. And this is what we're seeing today. And clearly, this is not as bad as Berlin or as urgent as Berlin. So I understand why you would decide against just bombing the crap out of it.
Yeah, and also, I mean, I think there's multiple reasons. So, I mean, as you mentioned, it was built in the Soviet Union to withstand a nuclear blast. So any munition that's not a nuclear weapon will not be able to get through the bunker system. And because you have civilians in there, so one, you have huge collateral damage as civilians in there. Secondly, it needs such huge munitions that the cost of it is huge. And then
you're gonna nuke Ukraine? Like, what? That just takes the war to a complete other proportion.
That's not going to happen. So, and then the third thing is if you are going to try and clear it out with your own guys, you're going to lose a lot of men because it's tunnel fighting. So it makes perfect sense just to blockade it. It'll cost a few troops to hold them there, but they have already run out of food by many reports and water and whatnot. So, and ammunition. So it's basically it's just a prison now. Actually, they've turned it into a giant prison effectively. I'm sure there's still some fighting going on, but they're done.
Let's talk about a few other situations. So like you were saying, Gonzalo Lira. That is a Ukrainian Congress Duma opposition party leader, right? Has just been gone missing and effectively assassinated by the Ukrainian Nazis under Zelensky. This would be the equivalent of the Capitol Hill, January 4th, if Trump directed his crowd to kill and dismember the, like, I don't know, like some like Democratic leader, Nancy Pelosi, let's say. This would be the equivalent of that in the United States, which is unthinkable.
Right, exactly. Just to give a bit more of his background. So I don't know if he's a member of the parliament, but nonetheless, he's actually a.
My apologies.
So originally he's a filmmaker, actually, an author and director of films. He's from Chile originally, American Chilean author, and he was in Kharkiv, and he had been reporting on the war and how things are going, the fighting, how things are going. And George Galloway had him on regularly to talk about, to have a different perspective of the conflict, to see what's going on. And yes,
so like this all happened after Zelensky managed to ban all opposition parties in the Duma, and this guy basically is like the thought leader for opposition in Ukraine, and now it's just like, it's over the top. It's crazy. But Nazis do what Nazis do.
Yeah. So I think basically, it looks like his final tweet was, "If no one hears from me in 12 hours, assume that I've been arrested." And he released a list of different people to search. And I assume these are also people that have been kidnapped or taken prisoner by the Ukrainian, whether it's the Ukrainian actual security forces or like these right-wing neo-Nazi paramilitary kind of hit squad. What do you want to call them?
What's the difference at this point?
Well, right.
They work so extensively with one another.
Right. So yes, in terms of like the awkwardness, this is again. So there's been a continuous thing in this conflict about things that are awkward for the West to report. So the West is very eager and will openly sort of dedicate an hour to an allegation against the Russian side of a cluster munition, civilian killing, whatever it may be. There'll be an hour. As soon as the Ukrainian side does something, so that footage where they were shooting the Russian prisoners in the legs, where the Kramatorsk missile that blew up and was an old Soviet missile that the Ukrainians were using. It was a cluster munition, and then the serial number came out, and it was most likely still under investigation, of course, potentially it's Ukrainian munition. That kind of story is awkward and given some airtime, but not a whole hour or whatever. And this is another one of those. A journalist that's been kidnapped by the Ukrainians, potentially, and maybe even killed by one of the squads, is awkward, at least.
Yeah, so speaking of that, let's talk about the Moskva cruiser. I mean, the footage and the pictures came out of how the Moskva sunk. It most likely struck like a water mine that has been left over since God knows when, because water mines, naval mines, so in the West, it is claimed that the Ukrainians fired a very slow, outdated anti-ship missile, and just one hit killed the Moskva. Which is just a completely insane story. And Richard, you were saying that the Moskva is like actually retired and not even performing a mission during the time that it was sunk.
No, that was me. I think it was someone else from the MDT. Right. I mean, it is an old ship from 1982, if I'm not mistaken. So it's a 40-year-old ship. I mean, my comments on this one, I've got sort of two things to say. I think, firstly, whether it was hit by a cruise missile or a mine, or there was explosion of ammunitions on board and it sank, none of these are particularly good for Russia. Like, this is still the flagship. Still, this thing was used in the Syrian conflict. It was firing cruise missiles, whatnot. I think it was actually firing cruise missiles in this conflict. I don't think that's accurate to say that it didn't take part. Nonetheless, it's still the flagship. No one since World War II has sunk, not just damaged, sunk, lost a ship like this.
The damage control of the sailors on that ship, and I would guess the Russian surface fleet in general, not good, subpar. That's no matter what cause that was, it was one hit, one explosion, and it led to the whole ship sinking. That is. If literally anyone go look at all the records of World War II, those warships, even like not battleships, like those that doesn't have crazy armor schemes or whatnot, takes a lot to sink. It takes more than just one torpedo. Okay, that's called ship design and damage control. That's the first thing. The second thing is
okay.
Go ahead.
So yeah, I also want to just say my 2 points. So one is there's no good way. It doesn't look good in any way for the Russian Navy. This is a disaster. This is probably the worst thing for a sort of story for them militarily. That's since the start of this thing. So the second thing I'll say though is, I want to see more information as to what the cause was, whether it was a mine or explosion or cruise missile. But I do think the fact that you haven't seen the West publishing whatever radar data or whatever feeds,
there was a battle report.
Right, so they would go, okay, we did detect XYZ missile fired from XYZ location, and we tracked it here. You would have, if that was available, I'm sure they would publish it. Which
it's very similar to every other Ukrainian thing. The Bucha incident and the train station, rail station incident. No confirmed data at all. I mean, with modern forensics, I'm sure like those victims, you can identify who they are at least, right? Like there's DNA, there's like IDs, and there's cell phone data, big data, there's GPS, but nothing, no data. So going back to the Moskva incident, the Moskva or Slava class quote unquote battle cruiser are supposed to be on the kinds of ships that is designed to be on the open seas, engaging. Is this the Slava class cruiser? I may be wrong.
I'm not too sure. I'm not an expert on the naval stuff.
They're designed to fight against aircraft carrier fleets.
Right.
Where there's lots of supersonic, not hypersonic, supersonic anti-ship missiles that are programmed to be able to evade missile interception systems of all sorts. And just all pointed like towards the front of the ship. And then when you see like the general direction of the enemy fleet, and when you're able to get a radar signal on it, you just point the ship towards them, and then just like release all the missiles at once in a massive volley, right? That was the plan, so that you can overwhelm the amount of missile defense systems that the fleet may have, and then achieve a kill. You can probably guess that these kinds of weapon systems and the kind of detection suite that is on the ship is not for fighting a coastal support battle against a primarily land force with some, maybe like, I don't know, 20, let's just say, at the best, anti-ship missiles fired from some coast. That is not the kind of battle that this kind of ship was this kind of ship was even designed for. And it's not even supposed to engage anything at such close distance, such as the Black Sea. It's supposed to be on the Pacific. That's where it's supposed to fight. So it's like you took you took a sniper rifle to a close quarters fight. That's the best analogy.
Right. Yeah.
So I think in a way, it's not that surprising that like it failed. Like it wouldn't succeed, but the fact that it's failed this spectacularly is it's beyond my expectation, to be sure.
Yeah, I wouldn't have called the sinking of the Black Sea flagship was going to happen, but nonetheless. So other things from the war that we've missed or whatever that have happened. I do want to make a comment on this. So the West Western media, right, whether it's British or American, has a very big habit of stating or theorizing an intended goal of the Russians in this conflict. So, for example, they'll say the goal was to take Kiev. The goal was to take Kiev. The goal was to take the whole country. The goal was to take Odessa. The goal was this. The goal was this. The goal was this. I think this is the case. We're projecting. This is what we think. That becomes then what the fact is. They say that is what they were doing, and they'll fill information to populate that narrative. What the case. And then when that thing doesn't happen, they'll go, we'll see the Russians have failed. at their goal. So they go, okay, look, they're trying to take Kiev, and then when they don't take it, it's pushed as a defeat. So right now, the one they're pushing is that the Russian advance in Donbass, the Russian effort to obviously push the boundary of DPR and LPR to the administrative boundaries of the oblast under normal Ukraine
and Kherson
and Kherson and all stuff. But particularly for Donbass, the Western media is saying that Putin has this deadline, that Putin has a May 7th to 9th deadline because he has to have finished the war by or have some big thing for Victory Day. So they keep saying that this is his deadline. This is Putin's deadline. I understand that there's logic to that kind of thinking. That of course May 9, big military parade. Sure, but the thing is, I mean, they had a Russian ally.
Russia and the Putin is just like this simple-minded, simpleton.
Right.
That
right.
was
Exactly. Right. So I saw that Al Jazeera had a Russian analyst from Nova Gazeta, which is even independent. It's not even a state paper. And he said, they'll have if this is not done by then, they'll have the parade. I don't think that geopolitics.
Yeah, they're already rehearsing for the parade with like in their.
Right. But yeah, that's one comment I want to make. Go ahead, Jen, if you've got a comment to make. I think we've got about we've got about 10. 5 or 10 more minutes. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, it's just a few closing comments. So essentially, if you can shift the goalpost like this, you can define if they have achieved their purpose or not. Or, in other words, whether or not they won the battle. That's really insane. So from the very beginning, I forgot how many episodes ago, I talked about maneuver warfare. And if you pin all the attention down in one place, odds are you're trying to concentrate at its polar opposite location to encircle and annihilate, destroy the isolated part. That prediction was 100% correct. Kiev was a feint, and Mariupol and Donbass, that was the real goal. That is the goal of maneuver warfare, and the theory still holds true. The other thing would simply be that it's from a lot of reports that we're hearing from locals in Ukraine. Weapons stockpiles for the Ukrainian forces are running out. And the Ukrainian government actually has a debt of like $6 billion. They're unable to pay the salary of any of those fighters and their employees. So people who were forced to show up at conscription, for example, in Ukraine, or at least draft, were like the Ukrainian administrative system is in such a large state of disarray to the point where like they're literally just, we don't know what to tell you. Go home, await orders. What?
Right.
Yeah. So this leads to a situation where if you look at what Russia is doing, the battalion tactical groups, the BTGs, relies very little on foot soldiers. So it's actually a David and Goliath situation where Ukrainian troops are the Goliath, really, that massively outnumber the Russian forces. What does that cause? Well, it calls a situation where it's very cheap for Russia to maintain its operation. And it's very expensive for Ukraine and the West that's supporting it to maintain the operation. So then wouldn't it be in Russia's interest to prolong this conflict for a reasonably long period of time to bleed the West dry economically? That was interesting.
That's an interesting one. I think we haven't got time to discuss that one at length. I do think that the longer the war goes on, it's actually not in Russia's favor, in my opinion. But we can discuss this maybe next week. Yeah. I do understand your logic, though, that the West is going to run out of weapons, and the West, can't.
Yeah, it's like a medium-term thing.
Sure.
Like you said, in the long term, probably not in Russia's favor. But I would say that in the medium term, there is a point to be made there.
I think what we'll do for next week then is, because of course Ukraine will still be a talking point next week, I have no doubt, is we'll talk about these two. So obviously the two British fighters, Aidan Aslan and I forgot the name of the other gentleman, who were in Mariupol and have been captured. Well, we should call them mercenaries. I think it's an accurate description.
Yeah.
And they were captured. The demand from the Russians is to swap them, British citizens, and demand the release of Viktor Medvedchuk. Now, we'll talk about this next week, I think. He was elected. He is an elected member of the Ukrainian parliament. And Zelensky's government have basically locked him up, accused him of this and that, of financing terrorism, whatever. But obviously at the breakout of the conflict, they put him under house arrest. They've locked him up. He's a member of the opposition in the parliament. So I think there's an interesting discussion to be had there. And I can probably see why the Russians have said release him. But it's obviously a big political bargaining chip for any sort of negotiations that would come in terms of the settlement that is to come after this conflict, as soon as it ends. Hopefully it ends soon. But I think that's all we have time for this week. So I'm glad that we're back online. It looks like our Facebook stream, just to mention, we have some sort of minor technical issue with that. So the YouTube stream is fine, but the Facebook stream seems to have not gone as ordinary. It might appear later. But thank you very much for watching. If you did watch, and please like, share, subscribe, notifications bell, and take a look at our website. We'll be having our new website come up probably next week, marxistthinktank.org, and we can, you can message us to admin@marxistthinktank.org for any news tips or anything. And if you have anything else, please put comments for anything you want us to discuss. If you want us to research anything or go into something, we'll take comments. And
comments on our YouTube, comment on our Facebook, or try to get in touch with our Discord server even.
Yes. Cool. But yeah, that's all we have time for today. So thank you very much. Thank you, Jen. And we'll see you guys next week.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.